Hello, and welcome to Obscure Laws. Tonight we are beginning a 12-part journey into one of the most unsettling experiences known across the world, something that blurs the line between science and folklore, fear and imagination. This will be a calm narration, so feel free to settle in, relax, and even drift to sleep while listening. In the comments, I would love to know where in the world you are watching from. If you enjoy these explorations into unusual legends and deep histories, please subscribe and leave a like, and let me know which other stories or traditions you would like me to cover next. Now let us begin with the subject itself, the Old Hag. To speak of the Old Hag is to speak of sleep paralysis, a strange and deeply unsettling state that thousands of people across cultures have reported for centuries. Imagine lying in bed, hovering between sleep and waking. Your mind feels alert. You know you are awake, or at least you believe you are, but your body refuses to respond. You try to move your arms, but they are pinned to your sides. You try to shift your legs, but they will not budge. You try to cry out, but your voice is silent, caught somewhere in your throat. At the same time, a pressure builds in your chest, heavy and suffocating, as though someone or something has sat down upon you. This is the heart of the Old Hag experience. It is not simply the inability to move, it is the terrifying sensation that you are not alone, that something unseen is pressing down on you, stealing your breath, watching you with unseen eyes. In countless accounts, people describe a figure hovering at the edge of their vision. Sometimes it is a shadow in the corner of the room. Sometimes it is a dark form perched upon their chest, pinning them in place. And sometimes it is an indistinct presence just beyond sight, its weight real, its malice undeniable. The term Old Hag syndrome has been used to describe this condition, drawing from the idea that what people experience is an attack by a witch-like figure, an ancient woman who creeps into bedrooms at night to torment sleepers. The hag is not always described the same way, but the effect is universal. Terror so intense that the memory lingers long after the paralysis itself fades. It is this combination of physical immobility and vivid, often terrifying hallucinations that has made the Old Hag one of the most feared and enduring figures in global folklore. From a scientific perspective, sleep paralysis occurs when the mind wakes before the body has fully released itself from the natural paralysis of rapid eye movement sleep. During this stage of sleep, the body is immobilized to prevent it from acting out dreams. Occasionally, the brain stirs to wakefulness while the body remains locked in this frozen state. The result is a brief but terrifying moment when consciousness and paralysis overlap. Breathing can feel shallow, chest muscles can feel tight, and any attempt to move is met with failure. To those who have never experienced it, it may sound strange. To those who have, it is unforgettable. But it is not just the paralysis that gives rise to the legend of the Old Hag. It is what comes with it. Hallucinations, shadows, whispers, and the undeniable feeling of a presence in the room. Many describe the sensation of malevolent eyes watching them. Others insist they feel cold hands pressing against their chest. Some recall the smell of decay, the sound of footsteps, or the weight of a figure crawling slowly up the bed. These are not random details. They are remarkably consistent across cultures and centuries, suggesting that whatever the origin of the experience, it speaks to something deep and universal in the human mind. For those who have lived through it, the moment is far more than a dream. It feels real in every sense. The paralysis leaves the person certain that they are awake. The hallucinations overlap with the familiar surroundings of their own bedroom. The pressure on the chest feels like actual weight. Even after the paralysis fades, the memory is so vivid that people are often reluctant to sleep again, afraid the hag will return. This is why the figure of the Old Hag endures. It is not a distant legend tied only to ancient texts or forgotten traditions. It is something that people today continue to describe, something that can happen to anyone, anywhere, in the silence of their own bedroom. It is at once medical phenomenon and folkloric nightmare, a crossroads of brain science and cultural storytelling, and it is precisely this dual nature that makes it so compelling and so terrifying. Imagine a young person lying down after a long day, falling asleep quickly, only to awaken to a crushing weight on their chest. They strain to cry out, certain that someone has broken into the room. Their eyes dart to the corners, and in the dim light they see a dark figure crouched at the edge of the bed. They cannot move, they cannot breathe. When at last their body releases them, they sit up, gasping, drenched in sweat, too shaken to sleep again. To that person, the experience is not science, it is encounter, and when they share their story, others nod knowingly, for they too have met the hag. The old hag may not leave physical marks, but she leaves scars of another kind. The fear she inspires shapes the way people think about sleep, about the night, and about the unseen forces that might intrude upon their lives. Some begin to fear bedtime itself, anxious that the paralysis will return. Others cling to rituals or prayers for protection. Still others become fascinated, drawn to the mystery of why so many across the world describe the same thing. The legend feeds itself, passed down in stories, whispered in warnings, reinforced with every new account. And so the old hag lives at the intersection of body and mind, science and folklore. She is at once a neurological event and a cultural figure, a phantom shaped by centuries of storytelling and by the fragile moments when the brain straddles sleep and waking. To speak of the old hag is to speak of human vulnerability, of the way the mind betrays the body, of the way fear itself can take form in the dark. Whether you call it sleep paralysis or witch attack, the experience is one of the most chilling reminders of how fragile the line is between the natural and the supernatural. This is the beginning of our journey into the world of the old hag. Over the next 11 parts, we will trace her roots across cultures, examine her place in language, folklore, art, and science, and explore why this figure endures even in the modern world. For now, it is enough to know this. The old hag is not just a story from the past. She is something that countless people still meet today, alone, in the quiet of their own bedrooms, when sleep betrays them and the night presses close. Part 2. Ancient words. Nightmare, Mara, mare. When we hear the word nightmare today, most of us think of a bad dream, a restless night filled with unsettling visions, the kind that makes us wake in the dark, heart racing, relieved when we realize it was only in our mind. But if we pull back the layers of history, we discover that the word nightmare does not simply mean a troubling dream. It carries with it centuries of weight, a lineage of folklore and fear that connects directly to the old hag. Understanding the origins of the word reveals just how deeply these nighttime experiences have always unsettled humanity. The English word nightmare is built from two parts. The first, night, is straightforward enough. The second, mare, is where the story deepens. In Old English, mare did not mean a horse. It referred to a supernatural being, often described as a malicious spirit that pressed down on sleepers at night. This Mara, as it was sometimes called, would sit upon a person's chest, crushing their breath, filling them with terror. From this root, we get the modern word nightmare, which originally referred not to a bad dream in general, but specifically to the suffocating encounter with a night demon. This root stretches even further back into Germanic and Scandinavian traditions. In Old Norse, the word Mara described a similar figure, a female spirit or witch-like presence that crept into homes and pressed down on sleepers. The Mara was feared for causing not only suffocating dreams but also physical weakness and illness. In some tales, the Mara was said to ride horses at night, leaving them sweaty and exhausted in the morning. The connection between the Mara, the hag, and the night was undeniable. These beings haunted the threshold between sleep and waking, embodying the terror of vulnerability when the body lies still. The use of the word mare as a spirit pressing down on sleepers appears in many forms across Europe. In Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish folklore, the Mara remained a feared figure, one blamed not only for nightmares but also for feelings of exhaustion and sickness that could not be explained. In some rural stories, the Mara was even described as a living person, often a woman who had the ability to send her spirit out of her body at night to torment others. This belief blurred the line between witchcraft and haunting, tying the Mara to broader fears of women who moved outside social norms. When English adopted the word, it carried this lineage of fear. The nightmare was not just a bad dream, it was the very experience of the old hag, the crushing weight on the chest, the suffocating presence in the night. Over time, as language evolved, the word's meaning broadened to include all frightening dreams, even those without the sense of paralysis or pressure. But the original meaning lingers in the way people describe the old hag today. They are not simply dreaming, they are trapped in a nightmare in the oldest sense of the word. This etymological thread reveals how deeply connected language and folklore are. Words carry the memory of human fears, even when their meanings shift. The nightmare of today, the bad dream we dismiss in the morning, is the descendant of the Mara, the hag, the pressing spirit that haunted our ancestors' nights. To call something a nightmare is to unknowingly invoke centuries of human experience with sleep paralysis, chest pressure, and the belief in supernatural attack. In other European traditions, variations of the same root appear. In German, the word Nachtmar carries the same meaning, combining night with the Mara figure. In Dutch, Nachtmar or Nachtmerrie refers to the same suffocating spirit. Across these languages, the same imagery appears again and again, a figure, often female, intruding into sleep to steal breath, to crush the chest, to cause terror. The repetition across cultures suggests not just linguistic connection but a shared human experience. Whatever name it took, the Mara was born of the same fear we still feel when we wake unable to move. The connection between the Mara and horses is also fascinating. In many European traditions, horses were said to suffer from the visits of the Mara. Farmers would find their animals in the morning, lathered in sweat, exhausted as though they had run for miles in the night. Some believed this was the work of a Mara riding the horse until dawn. Others thought the Mara pressed down on the animals just as it did on humans. In either case, the idea extended the hag's reach beyond the human bedroom, making her a figure who haunted the stables and fields as well. Even animals, it seemed, were not safe from the weight of the night spirit. The intertwining of nightmare, Mara, and hag also reflects the way language preserves cultural interpretations of bodily experiences. Sleep paralysis is a universal phenomenon, one that has been reported across continents, but the way it is understood is shaped by words, and words are shaped by culture. In Northern Europe, the Mara became the lens through which people understood the crushing pressure and terror of the night. In England, that lens was preserved in the word nightmare, a term that still carries echoes of supernatural visitation. When we look back at these roots, we see how the old hag has never been confined to one place or one time. The Mara of Scandinavia, the mare of Old English, and the nightmare we use today all describe the same core phenomenon, a human being pinned in their sleep, unable to breathe, overwhelmed by fear. The consistency of this image across centuries suggests that whatever the source, the experience has always been powerful enough to demand explanation. And when people sought that explanation, they turned to stories of spirits, hags, and demons. What is remarkable is how the meaning has softened over time. Today, when someone says they had a nightmare, they usually mean they dreamed of something unsettling: a fall, a chase, a loss. The sense of a supernatural being pressing on their chest has largely faded from the word's everyday use. Yet in the background, the original meaning lingers. For those who wake in the night, paralyzed and gasping, nightmare still means exactly what it once did: the visitation of something heavy, something unseen, something that feels alive in the room. In this way, the word itself is a bridge between the scientific and the folkloric. It is used casually in daily speech, but at its root, it ties directly to centuries of human fear about the hag and her weight. Each time we speak of nightmares, we echo those older traditions, even if we are unaware of it. The old hag is not just a figure in folklore, she is embedded in our language, hidden in the very words we use to describe the fears of the night. As we continue this journey, we will see that the Mara and the nightmare are only part of a larger tapestry. Cultures across the world have their own names and stories for the hag, each with unique details, yet all united by the same crushing fear. The words may differ, but the experience is the same. The roots of nightmare remind us that language is not just communication, it is memory. And in this memory, the old hag still breathes, waiting in the dark corners of our words and our sleep. Part 3. Folklore across the world. The Old Hag is not confined to a single culture, nor does she appear only in the European roots of the word nightmare. All around the world, across centuries and continents, people have described experiences that sound remarkably similar. Though the names and details vary, the core remains consistent: a sleeper trapped in their body, a heavy weight pressing on their chest, and the chilling sense of an intruder in the room. The hag, in her many forms, seems to be a universal figure, one that reveals as much about human fear as it does about cultural imagination. In Turkey, the word for this experience is karabasan, which translates roughly as the dark presser. The name captures the sensation directly, describing the overwhelming feeling of being held down by an unseen force. Turkish folklore describes the karabasan as a malevolent spirit that attacks sleepers, leaving them unable to move or cry out. In many stories, the figure is described as demonic, sometimes a black shadow, sometimes a creature with terrifying eyes. Families tell of waking in the night to see loved ones struggling against invisible weight, whispering prayers or invoking the name of God as the only way to break free. The karabasan is feared not only for the paralysis it brings, but for the belief that it can drain vitality or cause lingering illness. In Persian tradition, a similar figure is called the baktak. This being is also tied to sleep paralysis, described as a dark creature that sits upon the chest and steals breath. The baktak has long been part of Persian folklore, often explained as a jinn, a supernatural being capable of interfering with human lives. For those who believe in the baktak, the experience of sleep paralysis is not seen as a medical condition, but as an encounter with a spirit that feeds on weakness and fear. Remedies are spiritual in nature: prayers, protective charms, or recitations of holy verses, all intended to drive the being away. In Southeast Asia, particularly in Thailand and Laos, the phenomenon is known as Phi Am. Here again, the description matches sleep paralysis closely. The person wakes in the night, unable to move, and feels the presence of a ghost pressing on their body. In some traditions, the Phi Am is said to be the spirit of a person who died violently, returning to trouble the living. In the Philippines, a similar being is called the Batibat, a tree spirit that enters homes and sits upon sleepers. According to folklore, the Batibat punishes those who disrespect nature or cut down sacred trees. Victims wake unable to breathe, struggling under the crushing weight of the spirit. Across Europe, variations of the hag appear with regional detail. In Catalonia, Spain, people speak of the pisanta, a heavy black dog or cat that sits on the chest during sleep, causing suffocation and fear. The pisanta is said to sneak into homes at night through tiny openings, often targeting those who are vulnerable or guilty of wrongdoing. In Sardinia, Italy, there is the ammutadori, a demon who immobilizes sleepers by sitting on their chest. People who experience this are said to wake in terror, sometimes convinced they are about to die. Protective charms and prayers are traditional remedies, and many families still speak of these encounters as part of their lived folklore. In Newfoundland, Canada, the Old Hag has been firmly rooted in cultural memory. Stories collected from fishing villages describe generations of residents who claim to have been visited by the hag in the night. The descriptions are nearly identical to those found in Europe. The sleeper awakens, unable to move, with a crushing weight on their chest and a terrifying figure looming over them. Some accounts describe the hag as an old woman with long hair and wrinkled hands, others as a shadowy mass. The Newfoundland hag is spoken of casually, as something so common that everyone knows someone who has experienced it. To be hagged, as they say, is simply part of life by the sea. In Japan, the phenomenon is called kanashibari, a word that means bound in metal. It is described as a state where a person is held down by invisible chains, unable to move while fully aware of their surroundings. Japanese folklore sometimes ties this experience to vengeful spirits or curses, but over time, the word has also been adopted in modern medical discussions of sleep paralysis. Even so, the sense of spiritual danger lingers, and many who experience kanashibari still describe feeling a malevolent presence in the room. West African traditions also contain figures that mirror the hag. In Yoruba belief, there are accounts of witch-like beings who can press upon sleepers at night, stealing their energy or causing illness. In some Caribbean communities, descendants of African traditions speak of being ridden by a hag. This expression captures the physical sensation directly, as though a witch has mounted the sleeper like a horse and is riding them through the night. The imagery echoes the European association of the Mara with horses, suggesting a cross-cultural theme in which both humans and animals are tormented by night visitors. What is remarkable about these global traditions is their similarity. Whether it is the Karabasan in Turkey, the Baktak in Persia, the Batibat in the Philippines, the Pesanta in Spain, or the Old Hag of Newfoundland, the experiences are nearly identical. The sleeper awakens, finds themselves paralyzed, feels pressure on their chest, and senses a terrifying presence nearby. The figures differ in form, sometimes a witch, sometimes a demon, sometimes an animal or spirit, but the pattern is unmistakable. Humanity, it seems, has always grappled with the same night terror, shaped by culture into familiar forms. Science might explain this universality through the mechanics of sleep paralysis itself. The combination of paralysis, shallow breathing, and the overlap of dream imagery with waking perception creates the conditions for consistent hallucinations. A brain caught between sleep and wakefulness may interpret chest pressure as a figure sitting atop the body, or shadowy shapes in the dark as intruders. But the cultural interpretations give these sensations meaning, transforming them into spirits, witches, or demons that can be named and feared. Folklore, in this sense, is both explanation and coping mechanism. To call the experience the work of a hag or spirit gives it form, making the terrifying event something that can be discussed, prayed against, or protected from. Across the world, people have built rituals, charms, and stories around these encounters, embedding them into their traditions as both warnings and explanations. The Old Hag is not an isolated legend but part of a global web of belief that reveals how humans everywhere seek meaning in the face of the incomprehensible. As we look at these stories, it becomes clear that the hag is more than just a figure of folklore. She is a mirror of human vulnerability, a universal response to the helplessness of paralysis, the terror of being trapped in one's own body. The different names and forms only highlight how widespread and enduring the experience island. No matter where you live, the hag may come. And no matter what name you give her, the feeling is always the same, the weight of the night pressing down, leaving you breathless and afraid. Part 4. The stories people tell. When we talk about folklore, it can feel distant, as though we are speaking of things preserved only in books or whispered in the past. But the Old Hag is not just an old story. It is something people have lived through, and the power of the legend comes alive in their voices. The experiences they describe are raw, personal, and unsettling. To hear them is to realize that this is not just a cultural myth but a deeply human encounter, one that repeats itself across generations. In Newfoundland, the Old Hag has become almost a household word. To be hagged is so common there that locals speak of it casually, as though it were no stranger than catching a cold. Fishermen, farmers, children, and elders alike have all shared accounts of waking in the night, unable to move, their breath caught beneath an invisible weight. One woman recalled waking in her small cottage, the sound of the wind rattling against the windows. She felt herself suddenly pinned to the bed, as though an unseen visitor had climbed on top of her chest. She could not scream, though she tried. Her arms refused to move. At the foot of the bed, she thought she saw a shadowy figure, thin and bent, watching her. Only when she whispered a prayer in her mind did the pressure lift, leaving her gasping in the darkness. In another story from a fishing village, a man described being hagged while lying down after a long day at sea. He awoke with the certainty that someone was standing over him. He tried to roll to his side but could not. His chest felt tight and his breathing shallow. Then, as his eyes darted about the room, he saw what he described as an old woman, her long hair hanging loose, her eyes dark hollows. She sat upon him with surprising weight for her thin frame. He shut his eyes in terror, and when he opened them again, she was gone, though the heaviness remained. To him, it was not a dream. It was as real as the salt air and the waves he had braved that day. Stories like these are not confined to Newfoundland. All around the world, people tell of similar encounters, each shaped by local culture but tied by common threads. In parts of the Caribbean, to be ridden by a hag is spoken of openly. One man recalled waking to find himself frozen, his chest pressed down so forcefully that he felt he might suffocate. Though his eyes remained open, he could not cry for help. He swore he could feel hands, bony and cold, pressing into his shoulders. When he told his neighbors, they nodded knowingly, offering charms and prayers that their parents had passed down to ward off such attacks. For them, this was not merely a strange quirk of sleep, it was a real visitation, something that could not be ignored. First-hand testimony often carries small, vivid details that make the experiences so chilling. A young woman in the American Midwest once described how, during her college years, she would wake in the middle of the night unable to move. At first, she thought it was stress or exhaustion, but then she began to notice a pattern. Each time, she felt the same crushing weight, and each time she saw a figure at the edge of her vision. Once, she described a shadow crouched by the closet door. Another time, she was certain she saw a hand reaching toward her face, its fingers long and skeletal. These details, she said, were far too real to be dismissed as dreams. They left her shaken for hours, hesitant to fall back asleep. In Newfoundland, elders often share their hag stories with a tone of acceptance, as though this is simply part of the human condition. One man recounted how, as a child, he would wake to find himself unable to move, his breath caught in his chest. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but when he told his grandmother, she simply nodded and told him he had been hagged. She advised him to leave a small piece of bread near the bed as an offering, a tradition passed down through her family. He did so, and though he was not sure whether it helped, the act itself gave him comfort. These stories are powerful because they blur the line between dream and waking reality. The people who share them are not recounting fairy tales. They are describing nights when they felt powerless in their own bodies, when they believed something beyond themselves had entered their room. The emotions are raw: fear, dread, helplessness, and they linger long after the event. For many, the memory of being hagged is as sharp as any memory from waking life. In Italy, families still tell of the ammutadori, a figure who sits upon the chest of sleepers. One man recalled visiting his grandmother in Sardinia and hearing her describe the nights when she felt the demon pressing her down. She would say that she could hear the sound of footsteps approaching before the weight struck her, as though something invisible had walked across the floor and climbed upon her chest. For her, the experience was not symbolic or abstract. It was as physical as any illness, and it carried with it the certainty of being attacked by a force beyond her control. What unites all these accounts is the conviction of the witnesses. Even when science explains sleep paralysis as a natural event, those who have lived it are rarely satisfied with that alone. To them, the presence feels too real, the terror too overwhelming, the details too precise. A dream fades quickly, slipping away with the morning light. But hag stories linger, carried for years, sometimes for lifetimes, retold with the same sharpness as the night they happened. These stories also reveal how communities interpret the experiences together. In Newfoundland, to speak of being hagged invites others to share their own accounts, creating a collective acknowledgement of the phenomenon. In the Caribbean, stories of being ridden by the hag become lessons passed down, reminders of the rituals that can protect against such visits. In Italy, tales of the ammutadori are woven into village lore, connecting generations through shared fear and remedies. The stories are not isolated. They are part of a communal fabric, each account reinforcing the others. Hearing these voices, we come to understand why the Old Hag legend persists. It is not just because of ancient words or scattered folk tales. It is because people continue to live these moments, continue to wake in terror, continue to seek meaning for what has happened to them. The stories are alive because the experiences are alive, and they resonate across time and culture. In the end, the stories people tell about the Old Hag are not only tales of fear, they are testimonies to the fragility of the human condition, to the strange borderlands between body and mind, sleep and waking, natural and supernatural. They remind us that folklore is not just something we inherit, it is something we live, something we carry forward in our own words, shaped by our own nights of breathless silence and unseen weight. Part 5. The science behind the fear. When people describe the Old Hag, their words are filled with dread and certainty. They are convinced that what they experienced was real, that a force sat upon their chest, held them down, and filled the room with an ominous presence. Yet scientists and doctors have studied these same experiences and reached a different conclusion. To them, the Old Hag is not a spirit or a witch. It is a natural event that occurs when the body and brain fall out of step with each other during sleep. The result is sleep paralysis, a phenomenon that can be explained by the rhythms and functions of the human body. To understand sleep paralysis, we need to understand the cycle of sleep itself. When we sleep, our bodies move through distinct stages, from light sleep to deep sleep and into rapid eye movement sleep, often called REM. This is the stage most associated with vivid dreams. During REM, the brain is highly active, almost as active as it is during waking life. To protect us from acting out our dreams, the brain essentially turns off most voluntary muscle activity. This is known as REM atonia, a form of paralysis that keeps the body still even as the mind dreams. Without it, we would thrash, run, or lash out in our beds. In normal circumstances, the mind and body shift in and out of this paralysis smoothly. But sometimes, the timing falters. A person becomes conscious while their body remains locked in REM atonia. They are awake enough to be aware of their surroundings, to know they are lying in their own bed, but they are unable to move, speak, or cry out. Their body is still trapped in the protective paralysis of dreaming. This is the core of sleep paralysis, the scientific basis for what folklore has long described as the work of the Old Hag. The paralysis itself is terrifying, but it is only part of the story. During these episodes, the brain can also blend dream imagery with waking perception. Because the sleeper is partly awake, their mind begins to map their surroundings, the dim light of the room, the familiar outlines of furniture. But fragments of dream imagery intrude, spilling into the waking world. This creates hallucinations that feel vividly real. A shadow at the corner of the room becomes a figure. A creak in the house becomes footsteps. The sensation of tightness in the chest becomes the weight of a body pressing down. The brain, caught between two states, interprets sensations through a lens of fear. Scientists have studied the chest pressure so often described in these episodes. They explain that during REM sleep, breathing patterns shift. Muscles responsible for breathing are partially suppressed, making breaths shallower and slower. When a person wakes while still paralyzed, the awareness of this restricted breathing becomes overwhelming. It feels as though air is being stolen, as though something external is holding the chest down. The sensation is real, but the cause is internal. The mind, desperate to explain the experience, creates the image of a hag or demon pressing down upon the sleeper. The vivid hallucinations of sleep paralysis are shaped by the brain's natural tendency to seek patterns and explanations. When the mind senses danger, it looks for a source. A shadow in the corner becomes a threatening figure. A vague presence becomes an intruder. Neuroscientists suggest that the brain's amygdala, the center of fear response, is highly active during these episodes. It primes the mind to interpret any ambiguous stimulus as threatening. In other words, the brain is on high alert, and every sensation is filtered through fear. This is why the figures seen during sleep paralysis are almost always malevolent. The brain is not calm in these moments. It is preparing to fight for survival, even though the body cannot move. Researchers have also studied the frequency of sleep paralysis. It is estimated that a significant percentage of people experience it at least once in their lives, though many never speak of it. For some, it occurs only once, a fleeting nightmare that fades into memory. For others, it recurs regularly, sometimes linked to stress, irregular sleep schedules, or certain health conditions. Studies suggest that sleep deprivation, anxiety, and disrupted sleep cycles increase the likelihood of experiencing paralysis. In cultures where the Old Hag is a well-known figure, people often report higher rates, perhaps because awareness of the legend shapes their perception of the event. One fascinating aspect of sleep paralysis is how culture influences what people see. The neurological process may be the same everywhere: paralysis, shallow breathing, hallucination, but the interpretation differs. In Newfoundland, the presence is described as an old woman. In Japan, it is a binding force. In Turkey, it is a dark presser. In the Philippines, it is a tree spirit. This suggests that while the body creates the sensations, the mind clothes them in familiar cultural images. Folklore provides the lens through which the raw fear of paralysis is interpreted, yet even with these scientific explanations, the fear remains potent. Knowing the mechanics does not necessarily diminish the terror of the experience. A person trapped in paralysis, seeing shadows move and feeling weight on their chest, may understand on some level what is happening. But the immediacy of the sensation, the sheer physicality of the fear, overwhelms rational thought. This is why even people who know the science often still describe the experience as one of the most terrifying of their lives. The brain's explanations feel hollow compared to the vividness of the moment. Neuroscientists have also proposed evolutionary reasons for the sensations of sleep paralysis. They suggest that the feeling of a presence in the room may be tied to ancient survival instincts. Early humans, vulnerable while sleeping, may have evolved a heightened awareness of potential threats during the night. When the brain is caught between sleeping and waking, this instinct may manifest as the sense of an intruder. The chest pressure may reflect an exaggerated awareness of restricted breathing, a signal to wake the body if danger approaches. These instincts, while once protective, now manifest in terrifying but harmless ways during sleep paralysis. From a scientific perspective, then, the Old Hag is the product of timing errors in sleep cycles, the mechanics of breathing, and the brain's fear response. Yet this does not strip away the mystery. Instead, it reveals the profound ways our bodies and minds can conspire to create experiences that feel otherworldly. It also shows why these experiences have given rise to folklore in every culture. The sensations are too powerful to ignore, too vivid to dismiss, and too consistent to explain away without story. Science can map the mechanics, but the stories remain because they give human shape to the fear. Ultimately, the science behind the Old Hag does not diminish her. It explains how the paralysis occurs, how the chest pressure is felt, how the hallucinations arise, but it cannot fully explain why the experience feels so real, or why it leaves such lasting impressions. For that, we must turn to folklore, to culture, to the shared human need to make sense of what frightens us. The Old Hag is not only a quirk of biology, she is also the embodiment of fear itself, given form by centuries of human imagination. Part 6. Why the Hag hits the chest. One of the most striking features of the Old Hag experience is the sensation of pressure on the chest. No matter where in the world the stories come from, no matter what name the figure is given, this detail repeats itself with remarkable consistency. People wake in the night, unable to move, and almost immediately they feel as though something heavy has settled on their chest. They struggle to draw breath. Their ribs feel tight, their lungs starved of air. The sensation can be so strong that many believe they are dying or that something is deliberately suffocating them. This recurring theme raises the question, why the chest? Why has this particular detail become so deeply embedded in both folklore and lived experience? To begin with, there is the physical reality of sleep itself. During rapid eye movement sleep, the body is paralyzed and breathing patterns change. Muscles that normally aid in breathing are partially switched off, leaving the diaphragm to carry most of the work. Breathing becomes shallower, slower, and less flexible. When the mind wakes into this state while the body is still paralyzed, the natural restriction of breathing suddenly becomes a source of intense awareness. Instead of being unconscious of the change, the person is fully conscious and struggling against it. That struggle translates into the overwhelming feeling of heaviness across the chest. But the chest is more than just the physical center of breathing. It is also where we locate the seat of life itself. When something weighs on the chest, it threatens the ability to draw breath, the most fundamental act of being alive. Across cultures, breath is tied to spirit, to soul, to vitality. To feel breath stolen or crushed is to feel one's very existence in danger. This is why the Old Hag's attack feels so intimate and so personal. She does not simply frighten from a distance. She intrudes upon the core of life itself, making her terror not just psychological but existential. Folklore reflects this deep connection. In stories from Newfoundland, people speak of the hag sitting directly on their chest, her bony weight pressing into their lungs. In Turkey, the Karabasan is imagined as a dark creature that squats upon the body, deliberately crushing the chest. In Italy, the Amutadori does the same, its presence defined by suffocation. In Persian tradition, the Baktak is blamed for stealing breath by sitting heavily on sleepers. These images are not coincidental. They reflect the same sensation translated into cultural language, reinforcing the idea that the hag is not only a figure of fear, but one of deliberate violation of the breath. From a psychological perspective, the focus on the chest may also relate to how humans interpret bodily sensations. When something feels wrong in the body, the mind seeks an explanation. Chest pressure is frightening because it is tied to breath and heart, both of which are vital. In moments of panic or fear, the body already responds with tightness in the chest, shortness of breath, and racing heartbeat. When these sensations are amplified by paralysis, the mind interprets them as external attack. The hag becomes the embodiment of internal sensations, given form so that the terror has a face and a name. There are also evolutionary theories about why this particular sensation dominates. In the earliest human communities, vulnerability during sleep was a constant danger. Predators or enemies could strike while the body was defenseless. The instinct to be hyper-aware of breathing, to panic when air feels restricted, may have developed as a survival mechanism. The sensation of being suffocated triggers immediate alarm, ensuring the body struggles to wake. Sleep paralysis hijacks this system, creating the overwhelming illusion of an attacker pressing on the chest. What once may have been a protective instinct becomes a source of terror. The chest motif has inspired countless artistic and literary depictions of night terrors. In old European paintings, the hag is often shown perched squarely on the chest of a sleeper, her weight emphasized by the posture of her bent body. Sometimes she is depicted as an old crone with gnarled hands, sometimes as a dark demon, but always she presses on the chest, eyes glaring, daring the sleeper to fight back. The image has become iconic, shaping how generations imagine the experience even before they feel it themselves. Art has not only reflected the sensation but reinforced it, ensuring that the chest remains the focal point of hag encounters. For many who live through these episodes, the chest pressure feels more than physical. It feels deliberate. Victims often describe a sense of malevolence, as though the figure pressing on them is actively trying to harm them. Some describe hands pinning their shoulders, others a full body weight crushing their lungs. A few recall hearing whispers, laughter, or growls as the pressure increases. The sensation is rarely neutral. It carries with it the certainty of being attacked, of being chosen by something intent on doing harm. This transforms a bodily quirk into a spiritual or supernatural violation, something far more lasting than a fleeting moment of paralysis. The chest is also symbolically tied to the heart, the seat of emotion. To feel weight, there is not only to fear for one's breath, but to feel one's very being oppressed. The hag, in this sense, is not just stealing air. She is suppressing spirit, pressing down on identity itself. This interpretation helps explain why people often leave these encounters feeling more than fear. They feel drained, violated, and shaken at the core. The chest pressure is not simply a medical symptom. It becomes a metaphor for powerlessness, for being pinned down by forces too strong to resist. There is another dimension to consider. The consistency of this motif across cultures suggests that the chest experience may be unavoidable. Unlike visual hallucinations, which can vary widely depending on culture and personal expectation, the feeling of breath restriction is tied to universal biology. Everyone breathes. Everyone feels the difference between open lungs and restricted air. When sleep paralysis occurs, that physical sensation is the anchor. It does not matter where you live or what you believe. The chest will feel heavy, the breath shallow, and the mind will scramble for meaning. The hag, the demon, the spirit, these are all explanations draped over the same sensation. Still, the cultural layering adds immense power to the experience. In societies where the hag is well known, People anticipate chest pressure as her signature attack. This expectation can intensify the sensation, creating a cycle where folklore amplifies biology and biology reinforces folklore. Someone who knows the stories may wake paralyzed, feel the pressure, and instantly picture the hag, making the experience all the more terrifying. In this way, the chest motif is not just biological but cultural, a shared image that continues to haunt generation after generation. Ultimately, the reason the hag hits the chest is both simple and profound. It begins with biology, the shallow breaths of REM sleep, the paralyzed muscles, the brain's heightened awareness of suffocation. But it is deepened by human imagination, by the symbolic weight of the chest as the seat of life and spirit, by the cultural stories that shape how people interpret the pressure. The chest is the perfect stage for terror, the place where breath, heart, and soul converge. It is here that the old hag makes her home, pressing down on what matters most, leaving behind not just the memory of fear, but the sense of having come close to death itself. Part 7. Hallucinations and Shadows. When people describe encounters with the old hag, the paralysis and chest pressure are frightening enough, but what truly leaves a lasting scar in memory is what they see and hear during those moments. The brain, caught in a fragile borderland between sleep and waking, fills the silence with images and sounds that feel undeniably real. These visions are not faint or dreamlike. They have texture, presence, and weight, as though another being has entered the room. Again and again, the most common reports speak of shadows, figures lurking in corners, crouching at the bedside, or looming above the paralyzed sleeper. The phenomenon of shadow figures is widespread. Many who experience sleep paralysis recall seeing a dark silhouette, often shaped like a person, standing just within their field of vision. Sometimes the figure is tall and thin, sometimes squat and bent, sometimes nothing more than a shifting blur. Rarely does the figure have distinct features. Its lack of detail only makes it more frightening, leaving the mind to fill the blanks with whatever inspires the most dread. For some, the figure has glowing eyes. For others, it remains faceless yet charged with malevolence. The shadows do not simply exist passively. They watch, they lean closer, they move when the sleeper cannot. Sounds, too, intrude during these episodes. People speak of hearing footsteps in the room, slow and deliberate, approaching the bed. Others hear whispers, faint at first, then growing clearer, as though someone is speaking their name from just inches away. Some describe a rushing sound in their ears, like wind or wings beating, while others recall high-pitched ringing or growls that vibrate in the chest. A few even report hearing laughter, thin, mocking, inhuman. These auditory hallucinations merge seamlessly with the visual ones, completing the illusion that the hag, or something like her, has entered the space. The visions often unfold in stages. At first, there is only the paralysis and the chest pressure. Then the sense of presence arrives, that gut-deep certainty that someone else is in the room. The eyes dart around, scanning the familiar outlines of furniture in the dim light. And then the figure appears, sometimes at the corner of the room, sometimes at the foot of the bed. Many people insist that the presence does not simply appear randomly. It feels intentional, as though it has been watching silently for some time and only now chooses to reveal itself. The sudden recognition fills the mind with terror, amplified by the inability to move or defend oneself. Some report more elaborate hallucinations, where the shadow figure transforms into a fully realized being. In Newfoundland, people speak of seeing the hag as an old woman, hunched and wrinkled, her hair long and tangled, her face twisted in malice. In the Caribbean, the hag may appear as a witch-like figure with glowing eyes, crouched upon the chest. In Southeast Asia, the batibat is imagined as a massive, heavy spirit with broad features and wide hands pressing down. The details shift depending on culture, but the role is always the same: an intruder who brings weight, suffocation, and terror. Psychologists suggest that these hallucinations are the brain's attempt to interpret ambiguous stimuli. In low light, the brain struggles to make sense of shadows and shapes. When combined with the heightened fear response triggered by paralysis, the mind leans toward imagining threats rather than benign explanations. The presence of a shadow becomes a lurking intruder. A creak of the house becomes approaching footsteps. A shift in air becomes a whisper. Fear primes the mind to see danger, and the hallucination fills in the rest. Yet, for those who experience it, the scientific explanation does little to soften the impact. The figures feel too real, the sounds too clear, the sensations too deliberate. People often describe the experience as being more real than a dream, as though it happened in waking life. Some insist that they could see their rooms exactly as they were, the same light from a street lamp, the same chair in the corner, the same blanket pulled to the chest. To have a dark figure move through that familiar space makes it far harder to dismiss as imagination. An unsettling element of these hallucinations is the feeling of being targeted. The hag, or the shadow, rarely feels like a passive presence. Instead, it seems to focus its attention on the sleeper. People report locking eyes with the figure, or feeling its gaze pierce into them. Others describe the figure slowly leaning closer, until it hovers just above their face. The intimacy of the intrusion is what makes it so unbearable. It is not a ghost drifting in a hallway. It is a being that has chosen to stand at the bedside, to watch, to press down, to make itself known. Cultural stories shape how these hallucinations are interpreted. In Japan, the binding sensation of kanashibari is often accompanied by the vision of a ghostly figure or the sense of chains holding the body down. In Turkish accounts of the karabasan, the dark presser often has a distinct demonic form, with claws or glowing eyes. In Newfoundland, the hag takes on the appearance of a familiar old woman, as though she has stepped out of the village itself. The brain may produce the raw sensation, but folklore gives it a costume, dressing the shadow in forms that align with cultural fears. It is not only sight and sound that play a role. Some people describe tactile sensations during sleep paralysis. They swear they can feel hands clutching their arms or fingers brushing against their skin. Some even describe the sensation of being dragged from their bed or lifted slightly into the air. Others feel a crushing grip around their throat, tightening as they struggle for breath. These tactile hallucinations deepen the sense of reality, engaging more than just the eyes and ears, convincing the body that the experience is physical as much as mental. The shadows and hallucinations of sleep paralysis may reveal something profound about human perception. The brain craves explanation, and in the absence of clarity it creates narratives. A vague shape becomes a being. A sound becomes a voice. The body's own sensations of suffocation and immobility become the actions of an external attacker. This ability to project meaning onto fear is part of what makes humans so imaginative and so haunted. The hag, in this sense, is both real and unreal, a creation of the mind that feels no less terrifying than an actual intruder. For those who live through it, the images and sounds can linger long after the paralysis fades. Some wake and leap from the bed, turning on every light to prove they are alone. Others lie still, heart pounding, unwilling to close their eyes again for fear the figure will return. The hallucinations are not forgotten quickly. They etch themselves into memory with sharp detail, recalled for years with the same clarity as waking events. It is this vividness that ensures the stories endure, passed from one person to another, whispered as warnings and confirmations of a shared experience. In the end, the hallucinations and shadows of sleep paralysis are more than quirks of the brain. They are profound reminders of how fragile the boundary between waking and dreaming can be. They reveal the ways in which fear can shape perception, turning shadows into beings and silence into whispers. They explain why the Old Hag has remained such a powerful figure in folklore across the world. The shadows may be illusions, but the terror they inspire is real, and that terror is what gives the hag her enduring power. Part 8. Night Hags in Art and Literature. The Old Hag has never remained confined to whispered stories in dark rooms. She has found her way into the arts, into paintings, poetry, and literature, where her presence has been preserved for centuries as both symbol and spectacle. Artists and writers, fascinated by the fear she inspires, have sought to capture her form, to give body to the formless terror of the night. In doing so, they have ensured that her image continues to haunt us, not only in our dreams but in the very fabric of culture. One of the most striking images of the night hag in art is the painting of an incubus crouched on the chest of a sleeping woman, her head thrown back, her body limp under the weight. This image, painted in the 18th century, remains iconic because it visualizes the precise sensation so many people describe. The chest pressure, the immobility, the sense of being suffocated, it is all there, rendered in oil and canvas. The hag in this depiction is not an old crone, but a small demon, ugly and leering. Still, the effect is the same: the violation of sleep, the invasion of vulnerability, the merging of nightmare and waking reality. Viewers who see the painting, even today, shiver at its familiarity, as though it reflects not just a work of imagination, but a lived memory of their own. In literature, the hag has appeared under many names, often cloaked in the language of witches, demons, or night spirits. Medieval texts speak of succubi and incubi, spirits that visit sleepers to torment them, stealing energy or causing suffocation. Though not always described as an old woman, these beings carry the same traits: the paralysis, the chest pressure, the sense of being invaded in one's most private space. The link between sleep, sexuality, and fear runs deep in these accounts, with the hag often seen as a corrupter, a violator of boundaries between body and spirit. Poetry, too, has not escaped her influence. Writers have long drawn upon the imagery of night terrors to explore human vulnerability. The hag appears in verses as a figure who creeps silently into rooms, presses upon dreamers, and steals their breath. She becomes a metaphor not only for fear, but for guilt, for anxiety, for the weight of unspoken thoughts that descend upon the sleeper. The language of suffocation and paralysis lends itself easily to poetic expression, and so the hag becomes both literal and symbolic, a figure who represents the burdens of the human mind as much as the terrors of the unseen world. In folklore collections across Europe, stories of the Mara or night hag were often written down by scholars and travelers who sought to preserve local traditions. These texts describe villagers who swore they had been visited in the night, their chests crushed, their bodies frozen, their eyes forced to stare at an unwelcome intruder. The written accounts preserve not only the words, but the raw terror of those who experienced it. For the reader, these stories served as warnings, reminders that the hag was not just a story to frighten children, but a very real threat lurking in the dark. The hag also found her way into plays and dramas, where she appeared as a symbol of the uncanny, the boundary between human and otherworldly. In Shakespeare's works, references to night hags appear as shorthand for the unnatural, the sinister, the terrifying. These references would have been immediately understood by his audience, who knew well the stories of women or spirits that pressed upon sleepers at night. By invoking the hag, playwrights tapped into a shared cultural fear, using her as a figure who needed no explanation. She was already present in the imagination of the people. Visual art has repeatedly returned to the image of the sleeper under attack. In later centuries, artists painted not only demons crouching on the chest, but also shadowy women, twisted and leering, their hands gripping the shoulders of helpless dreamers. These images captured the intimacy of the fear, the way the hag was never distant but always close, pressing her weight into the very heart of the victim. In some paintings, the hag is accompanied by shadowy animals, cats or dogs that symbolize witchcraft and mischief. In others, the hag's face is contorted into a grimace that seems halfway between human and monstrous. Each depiction adds to the collective image of what it means to be hagged. Even in modern times, the old hag appears in popular culture. Writers of horror stories borrow the imagery of paralysis, shadows, and chest pressure, dressing it in new clothes but keeping the same essence. Films depict characters waking in the night, frozen in terror, as a figure creeps closer. Novels describe protagonists pinned to their beds, their eyes wide as they watch a shadow rise from the corner. The hag has been woven into ghost stories, alien abduction accounts, and tales of demonic possession. Though the names change, the themes are the same: immobility, intrusion, breathlessness, and the certainty of not being alone. One of the reasons the hag thrives in art and literature is because she embodies the universal. Every human being knows the vulnerability of sleep, the helplessness of lying unconscious while the world continues around them. To give form to that vulnerability is to speak to something we all recognize. The hag is not tied to one religion or culture alone. She is a shared nightmare, a symbol of human weakness, a reminder of how fragile the line is between safety and danger when the body is at rest. Artists and writers have drawn upon this shared understanding, ensuring that the hag remains relevant even when the world changes. The hag also serves as a metaphor for other weights we carry. Writers use her to symbolize oppression, guilt, or unspoken desires. The chest pressure becomes the burden of secrets. The paralysis becomes the inability to act against injustice. The suffocation becomes the weight of societal expectations. In this way, the hag is not only a figure of folklore but a flexible image that can be adapted to countless human struggles. She is both literal and figurative, both nightmare and allegory. It is no surprise, then, that the hag continues to appear in the arts today. Contemporary poets describe her in verses about trauma and fear. Painters render her as a shadow that hovers over dreamers, blending modern styles with ancient imagery. Filmmakers borrow her form to frighten audiences who may never have heard of the Mara or the Baktak, but who instantly recognize the terror of being unable to move while something presses in the dark. The hag has become a cultural shorthand for a very specific kind of fear, one that artists return to again and again because it resonates so deeply. Through art and literature, the old hag has achieved a kind of immortality. She is not confined to the fleeting moments of sleep paralysis, forgotten upon waking. She is preserved in images, in words, in stories passed down across centuries. Even those who have never experienced sleep paralysis themselves may feel they know the hag because they have seen her crouched in paintings, read of her in poems, or watched her on screen. She has escaped the bedroom and entered the broader imagination, where she continues to frighten and fascinate in equal measure. Part 9. Prevention and Protection. Whenever a community develops a story of something frightening, it almost always develops ways to fight it off. The old hag is no different. For as long as people have spoken of her, they have also spoken of remedies, charms, and protective rituals meant to keep her away. These methods vary from culture to culture, shaped by religion, tradition, and local beliefs, but they all share the same intent: to reclaim the night, to make the bedroom safe, and to give people a sense of control over something that otherwise feels uncontrollable. Even today, when science explains sleep paralysis in terms of brain chemistry and sleep cycles, many still turn to these old practices, or at least take comfort in knowing they exist. In Newfoundland, where being hagged is a common phrase, people have long relied on small rituals to protect themselves. Some leave a knife or a piece of iron under the bed, believing that metal wards off evil. Others place a broom by the door, the idea being that the hag, before entering, would be compelled to count every straw and be distracted until morning light drove her away. Families also told children to place a small piece of bread by the bedside as an offering, a gesture that showed respect and hopefully convinced the hag to pass them by. These practices were less about certainty than reassurance. They gave people something to do, a sense that they could defend themselves against the nightly terror. In the Caribbean, where being ridden by the hag is a well-known phrase, protective practices often draw from African traditions blended with local beliefs. People hang charms above their beds, sprinkle salt in doorways, or recite specific prayers before sleeping. Some keep bottles of water or mirrors near their beds, believing that spirits are repelled by reflections or distracted by flowing water. Others sleep with a Bible or religious text under the pillow, trusting that the sacred words would create a barrier against intrusion. For those who grew up with these traditions, the rituals are not just superstition. They are part of the rhythm of life, passed down through families as naturally as recipes or songs. In parts of Europe, where the Mara or night hag was feared, remedies often involved religious practices. Villagers would make the sign of the cross before bed, keep holy water in their homes, or say specific prayers asking for protection against night demons. Charms of herbs were also common. Street, John's wort, garlic, or certain flowers were thought to ward off evil spirits. Horses, believed to be plagued by the Mara as well, were sometimes protected with iron objects tied to their stables or charms woven into their manes. The remedies were practical in appearance but spiritual in intention, addressing not only the physical fear but the unseen forces believed to cause it. In Turkey, where the karabasan is feared, one traditional remedy involves reciting verses from the Quran. Religious faith provides not just comfort but a direct method of defense, with the belief that divine words repel the spirit. Families sometimes advise placing specific objects near the bed, like scissors or knives, to cut through the hold of the karabasan. Others teach that sleeping on one's side, rather than the back, makes one less vulnerable. This advice is practical, as modern studies show that sleep paralysis often occurs when lying on the back. Yet in folklore, the positioning is explained as a way to deny the spirit access to the chest. In Japan, where Kanashibari describes the binding sensation of paralysis, remedies blend traditional spiritual practices with modern understanding. Some people keep protective charms from temples near their sleeping space. Others burn incense before bed, believing it clears away negative energy. Families sometimes teach children to avoid certain behaviors before sleep, such as disrespecting shrines or speaking poorly of the dead, which are thought to invite spirits that cause paralysis. These practices reveal how prevention is often tied not only to physical protection but also to moral behavior. To avoid the hag or the binding, one must live in harmony with spiritual expectations. In Southeast Asia, particularly in the Philippines where the batibat is feared, the remedies are deeply tied to respect for nature. The batibat is said to emerge when sacred trees are cut down without proper rituals. To prevent her wrath, people are taught to respect the spirits of the forest, to apologize when felling trees, and to keep protective charms in their homes. When paralysis strikes, some call on ancestors in prayer, believing that family spirits can drive away the batibat. Here, protection is not only about keeping oneself safe, but about maintaining balance with the natural and spiritual world. Modern approaches to prevention are often more clinical but still echo the same desire for control. Sleep specialists advise maintaining regular sleep schedules, reducing stress, and practicing good sleep hygiene. Avoiding caffeine before bed, creating a calm sleeping environment, and ensuring enough hours of rest are all recommended to reduce the likelihood of paralysis. Scientists note that sleep deprivation, irregular hours, and stress increase the risk of episodes. In a way, these recommendations mirror the old rituals. Where once people placed charms or prayed, today they adjust their routines and create calming rituals of their own. The intent remains the same, to make the night safe. Psychological strategies also help some people manage the fear. Knowing that the experience is a recognized phenomenon, not a supernatural attack, can reduce anxiety. Some people train themselves to focus on slow breathing when paralysis strikes, reminding themselves that it will pass. Others try to move small muscles, like wiggling a toe or finger, as a way of breaking the paralysis. These methods do not eliminate the terror, but they provide tools to endure it. Just as charms and prayers gave earlier generations strength, modern techniques give reassurance to those who continue to face the old hag in their sleep. What is striking about all these remedies, both old and new, is how similar they are in spirit. They acknowledge the fear, they give people actions to take, and they transform helplessness into empowerment. Whether it is laying a piece of bread by the bed, reciting verses, or adjusting sleep routines, the act itself matters as much as the result. People facing the old hag feel powerless. Prevention and protection rituals return some of that power, reminding them that they are not entirely at the mercy of the night. The rituals also highlight the deep role of community. In many cultures, protective practices are passed down from parents to children, neighbors to neighbors. They are shared not just as folklore but as practical wisdom. A grandmother tells her grandchild to place scissors under the pillow. A father teaches his son a prayer to say before sleep. A friend advises another to change sleeping positions. Each act ties the individual to the collective, reminding them that they are not alone in their struggle. The hag may isolate her victims in silence, but the community surrounds them with memory and tradition. Ultimately, prevention and protection reveal the human need for agency. The old hag represents helplessness, the terrifying realization that we cannot move, cannot speak, cannot even breathe freely. By creating rituals and remedies, people push back against that helplessness. They reclaim some measure of control, however small, and in doing so, they reshape the experience from pure terror into something survivable. Whether through ancient charms or modern science, the message is the same: we are not entirely defenseless. Even in the face of the hag, there are ways to resist, ways to prepare, and ways to endure. Part 10. Psychological impact. The old hag is not only a fleeting terror of the night. For many people, the experience leaves a lasting impression that reaches far beyond a single episode. The paralysis and chest pressure fade with the dawn, but the memory of helplessness clings. The shadows seen, the whispers heard, the sense of an intruder in the room, these do not simply disappear. They linger, sometimes shaping how a person sleeps, sometimes reshaping how they see the world. The psychological impact of the old hag is as real as the physical sensations that spark it. For those who experience sleep paralysis only once, the aftermath may be a day or two of unease. They wake shaken, unsure of what just happened, perhaps telling themselves it was only a dream. But for others, particularly those who suffer repeated episodes, the impact becomes cumulative. Each encounter builds upon the last, and soon the bed itself feels like a place of danger. People describe dreading sleep, staying up late to avoid lying down, or jerking awake in panic at the first sign of stillness. The very space meant for rest becomes charged with fear, and this alone can cause a spiral of exhaustion and anxiety. The memory of paralysis can also take on a life of its own. Many describe not just the fear of the moment, but the shame of it, the knowledge that they were powerless in their own body, unable even to cry out. This sense of powerlessness can be deeply unsettling. It challenges the basic assumption that we are in control of ourselves, at least when awake. The hag strips away that assumption and leaves behind the realization of just how fragile that control really is. Some people report feeling shaken for weeks, replaying the memory, unable to shake the certainty that they were truly attacked. Fear of recurrence is one of the most significant psychological effects. Once someone has been hagged, they often lie awake worrying it will happen again. This fear itself disrupts sleep, creating a cycle where anxiety makes rest more difficult, and lack of rest increases the likelihood of further episodes. The brain, already on high alert, interprets every creak in the house or flicker of shadow as a potential sign of danger. People become hyper-aware of their sleep environment, checking doors and windows, leaving lights on, or surrounding themselves with protective objects. The rituals that once comforted can also serve as reminders of the fear, keeping it alive. For some, the impact goes even deeper, intersecting with trauma and mental health. People who have lived through repeated episodes of sleep paralysis often report heightened anxiety, panic attacks, or lingering feelings of depression. The inability to control their own body during those moments mirrors other feelings of helplessness they may face in life, intensifying their struggles. A person already under stress may find the hag becomes a nightly companion, deepening their sense of vulnerability. In this way, the hag does not only intrude on the night, she intrudes on the psyche, becoming part of a person's daily fears. Hallucinations during paralysis can also leave scars. To see a figure crouched on the chest, to hear whispers in the dark, to feel hands clutching the throat, these are not ordinary dreams. They feel real, and for some, they become indistinguishable from memories of waking life. People describe being unable to walk into their own bedrooms without remembering the face they saw or the pressure they felt. The mind may know it was hallucination, but the body remembers it as truth. This is part of why the hag holds such power. The brain records the fear as though it was survival itself, marking the experience as deeply as any real danger. There is also the social impact to consider. In cultures where the hag is well known, people may find comfort in sharing their experiences, knowing others understand. But in places where the phenomenon is not widely discussed, those who experience it may feel isolated. They may hesitate to tell anyone, fearing they will be dismissed as imagining things or even judged as unstable. This silence adds another layer of stress. Carrying the memory of such a terrifying encounter without validation can weigh heavily on the mind, reinforcing the sense of being alone in the experience. Repeated encounters with the hag can also change how people relate to darkness. Some develop a deep fear of sleeping alone, insisting on keeping a partner nearby or refusing to turn off the lights. Others develop habits of staying awake until exhaustion takes over, hoping that deep sleep will spare them from another episode. Over time, these habits can harm health, leading to chronic fatigue, lowered immunity, and difficulty concentrating. The hag may not physically harm her victims, but the fear she generates can erode their well-being in subtle yet significant ways. The hag's impact also reveals how closely tied mind and body are. The physical sensations of chest pressure and paralysis become psychological wounds, but the psychological wounds in turn influence the body. Stress hormones rise, sleep quality falls, and the cycle reinforces itself. Some who experience frequent episodes describe a sense of dread that hangs over them even in the day, as though the hag might return the next time they close their eyes. This persistent anxiety becomes a weight of its own, another form of paralysis carried into waking life. For others, the psychological impact manifests in curiosity rather than fear. Some describe becoming fascinated by the phenomenon, researching folklore, seeking scientific explanations, or even trying to induce episodes deliberately. For them, the hag becomes a subject of study, a way to confront fear through knowledge. But even this curiosity often carries an undertone of unease. The fascination is born from the undeniable power of the experience, and while some may learn to navigate it, the sense of vulnerability never disappears entirely. The hag also intersects with broader beliefs about the supernatural. For those who already believe in spirits, demons, or witches, the psychological impact is magnified. An episode of paralysis becomes proof that such beings exist, a confirmation of fears passed down through family or community. Once the experience is interpreted through this lens, the fear deepens, and the psychological toll becomes harder to undo. The hag is not just a trick of the brain, she is a real intruder, and her return is always possible. This belief can shape how people live, how they sleep, and how they interpret every unexplained sound in the night. Ultimately, the psychological impact of the old hag shows that the human mind does not separate easily between dream and reality. When fear is strong enough, when sensations are vivid enough, the memory burns as though it were a lived event. This is why the hag continues to haunt not only folklore but individuals long after the episodes fade. She is more than a symptom of disrupted sleep. She is a weight carried in the psyche, a reminder of how fragile the boundary is between safety and terror, control and helplessness. Part 11. The Old Hag versus Paranormal Theories. Whenever something strange happens that science struggles to fully explain, the human mind naturally reaches for other answers. The Old Hag is no exception. While scientists describe her as the product of REM sleep, muscle paralysis, and dreamlike hallucinations bleeding into wakefulness, many who have lived through the experience remain unconvinced. For them, what happened felt too real, too physical, too intentional. And when fear cannot be soothed by biology alone, other explanations rise to fill the space. Over centuries, the hag has been described as a witch, a demon, a spirit, and in more modern times, even as a visitor from another world. One of the most enduring paranormal interpretations frames the hag as a form of demonic attack. In many Christian traditions, paralysis at night has long been associated with evil spirits. Medieval writings describe incubus and succubus beings who visit sleepers, pinning them down, draining energy, or tempting them towards sin. The similarities to old hag stories are obvious. The immobility, the chest pressure, the terrifying presence that looms close to the bed. For believers, the overlap is not coincidence. They see the hag as one more mask worn by forces of darkness. The hallucinations, instead of being explained by the brain, are explained as glimpses of the demonic. This interpretation carries particular weight for those who hear voices during paralysis. Whispers, growls, and mocking laughter sound to them like confirmation that something otherworldly has intruded. In communities where witchcraft is feared, the hag is seen not as a demon but as a human who has chosen to wield dark powers. This view is especially strong in Newfoundland, parts of the Caribbean, and West Africa. To be hagged, in these traditions, is to be targeted by a witch, often someone from the local community. Stories describe witches riding their victims like horses, draining them of strength, or punishing them for offenses real or imagined. The physical sensations of being pressed or ridden map perfectly onto this belief. The chest pressure becomes the witch seated firmly on the body, guiding the helpless sleeper as though reins were in hand. For those who believe this, the hag is not an abstract figure but a neighbor, someone known, someone to be feared in daylight as much as in dreams. Spiritual interpretations often involve restless souls or ancestral spirits. In Southeast Asia, for example, the batibat is said to be the spirit of a tree disturbed by human activity. In Japan, kanashibari is sometimes explained as the work of angry ghosts. These beliefs highlight a key difference from the demonic view. The hag here is not necessarily a servant of evil, but a spirit enforcing balance or expressing grievance. A person who feels chest pressure in the night may interpret it as punishment for breaking a taboo, failing to honor ancestors, or disrupting sacred spaces. The paralysis becomes a form of cosmic justice, a reminder of the ties between the living and the dead. As the modern era progressed, a new interpretation began to take root, the connection between sleep paralysis and alien abduction stories. In the 20th century, countless individuals began reporting that they had been taken from their beds by beings from beyond Earth. The details of these accounts often overlap with hag stories. Victims describe waking in the night, unable to move, aware of strange figures surrounding them. They feel paralyzed, hear odd sounds, sometimes even feel as though they are being lifted from the bed. Later, they recall visions of bright lights, clinical procedures, or being transported elsewhere. To skeptics, these are reimagined hag stories shaped by modern fears of extraterrestrials. To believers, they are proof that the hag is not a spirit or witch, but an alien presence that has been with humanity all along. This alien interpretation gained traction because of the consistency of details across unrelated cases. Just as hag stories share the motifs of paralysis, chest pressure, and shadow figures, abduction reports share themes of immobilization, beings standing nearby, and invasive experiences. Both are intensely physical, both are accompanied by fear, and both blur the line between dream and waking reality. Some researchers even suggest that folklore of the hag and modern abduction accounts are two expressions of the same underlying phenomenon, interpreted differently depending on cultural context. Where medieval villagers saw witches, modern witnesses see aliens. The body remains paralyzed, the breath is stolen, and the mind fills in the intruder with the image most terrifying to that society. Yet not everyone agrees that these explanations reduce to culture alone. Many who have lived through hag encounters insist that they cannot be written off as brain tricks. The sheer reality of the presence, the weight of the pressure, the clarity of the visions, these leave lasting conviction. For them, the hag was not imagined. She was in the room, watching, pressing, whispering. This insistence keeps paranormal interpretations alive. If science cannot fully account for why the experiences feel so real, then perhaps something else is at work. Paranormal researchers sometimes point to the consistency of hag stories across cultures as evidence of reality. How could people separated by oceans and centuries describe the same details if it were not true? The same chest pressure, the same immobility, the same figure at the bedside. For believers, this consistency is not proof of shared biology, but of a shared encounter with something external. The hag, they argue, is universal because she is real. She does not belong to one culture but to humanity as a whole. She has always been with us, wearing different names but bringing the same terror. Others take a more psychological paranormal approach, suggesting that the hag may be a manifestation of energies or forces we do not yet understand. Some speak of astral projection, where the mind leaves the body, and the hag is the boundary figure encountered at the edge of this state. Others suggest that the hag represents suppressed trauma or repressed fears that take shape in the liminal space between sleep and wakefulness. These views do not dismiss science but expand upon it, proposing that sleep paralysis may open doors to realms we cannot yet explain. The debate between scientific and paranormal interpretations highlights something essential about human experience. When fear is powerful enough, we seek explanations that match its intensity. The clinical language of rematonia and hallucination feels too sterile to capture the horror of waking frozen with a figure crouched on the chest. People reach instead for stories of witches, demons, or aliens, because those stories feel closer to what they lived. In that sense, the hag is both a biological phenomenon and a cultural expression, both a scientific subject and a paranormal mystery. She lives in the space where these worlds overlap. For some, clinging to paranormal explanations provides comfort. If the hag is a spirit, then prayers and charms can protect against her. If she is a witch, the community can identify and guard against her. If she is an alien, then the experience connects to a larger narrative of cosmic encounters. These interpretations give meaning where science gives mechanism. They allow people to place their fear into a story, and stories have always been our way of surviving the incomprehensible. In the end, the Old Hag stands as both a scientific puzzle and a paranormal riddle. She is REM sleep gone awry, but she is also a demon in the night. She is muscle paralysis, but she is also a witch astride her victim. She is a hallucination, but she is also an alien presence probing from beyond. Each interpretation tells us as much about human imagination as it does about the hag herself. Whether one leans towards science or the supernatural, the fear remains the same, and the hag continues to press down upon the boundary between what we know and what we dread. Part 12. Why we still believe. The power of folklore. Folklore never truly dies. It bends, it shifts, it adapts to new times and new fears, but its core remains. The old hag, the night mara, the chest rider, the shadow in the corner, whatever name she takes, she is still with us. For centuries she has pressed down on sleepers, leaving them frozen and gasping for air. Science has explained her in terms of sleep paralysis, brain chemistry, and hallucination. Religion has described her as demon or witch. Culture has wrapped her in different clothes, from the batibat in the Philippines to the karabasan in Turkey. And yet, across all these explanations, the stories continue. They are still told in small villages, in crowded cities, whispered in bedrooms, and shared online in the language of modern fear. What gives the old hag her power is not just the paralysis itself, but the way the experience strikes at something deeply human. Sleep is supposed to be safe. It is the place we retreat to for rest, the one time of day when the world cannot demand anything from us. To have that safety invaded, to wake in one's own bed and find it turned into a prison, is a betrayal of the most intimate kind. The hag represents not only terror but violation of trust. She enters when we are most vulnerable, when we cannot fight, and she reminds us of how fragile our sense of control really island. That is a fear that transcends centuries, cultures, and belief systems. It belongs to all of us. The persistence of the hag also shows the power of stories in shaping how we interpret our lives. Without folklore, sleep paralysis might be dismissed as nothing more than an unpleasant trick of the body. But with stories, it becomes something larger, something communal. When a person in Newfoundland says they have been hagged, they are not just describing paralysis, they are placing themselves within a tradition that stretches back generations. When someone in Turkey speaks of the karabasan, or when someone in Japan speaks of kanashibari, they are connecting their personal fear to a shared cultural narrative. The stories allow people to understand what happened, to put words to the unspeakable, and to know they are not alone. This is the true function of folklore. It is not simply about monsters or spirits, it is about making sense of fear, giving it form, and finding ways to live with it. The hag may crouch on the chest, but the stories provide tools to push back, whether through charms, prayers, or even the simple comfort of knowing others have endured the same thing. Folklore turns isolation into community. It takes the silence of paralysis and fills it with voices, each telling of their own night terrors, each reminding us that we are not the first and will not be the last to face the hag. Even as science explains the mechanics of sleep paralysis, the stories remain necessary. Knowing about REM, atonia, and brain misfires does not erase the terror of the moment. It does not stop the feeling of weight, the sound of whispers, or the sight of a shadow leaning closer. The experience is still real, still vivid, still unforgettable. The The folklore and the science do not cancel each other out. Instead, they coexist, two lenses through which we look at the same phenomenon. One tells us how it happens, the other tells us what it means. Why do we still believe in the hag? Perhaps because belief is not always about proof. Belief is about resonance. It is about the way a story captures an experience so perfectly that it feels truer than science ever could. The hag is not just a medical condition. She is the embodiment of helplessness, of suffocation, of the dread that creeps in when the lights go out. People will always believe in her because people will always feel her. As long as sleep paralysis continues, the hag will continue, pressing down in the night, leaving behind stories that demand to be told. But the hag is not only a figure of fear, she is also a reminder of the resilience of the human mind. Every culture that has faced her has developed rituals, remedies, and explanations to cope. Communities have woven her into their myths, transforming terror into tradition. Individuals have turned their encounters into poems, paintings, and prayers. Even now, people who suffer from sleep paralysis share their experiences online, turning private nightmares into public discussions. In this way, the hag unites us. She reveals not just our vulnerability, but also our creativity and our need to find meaning. When we look at the long history of the hag, from medieval demons to modern alien abductions, we see more than just fear. We see a mirror of humanity itself. We see how our minds shape experiences into stories, how our cultures dress those stories in familiar forms, and how those stories endure long after the first terror has passed. The hag is part of us because she reflects us. She embodies the limits of our control, the depths of our imagination, and the enduring need to explain the unexplainable. And so we come to an ending. The hag will not vanish with this story, nor will she disappear with any explanation. She will remain in the corners of bedrooms, in the creases of dreams, in the words whispered by those who wake gasping in the night. But in telling her story, we take back a measure of control. We recognize her for what she is, fear given form, a shadow cast by the workings of our own minds, and a figure that has walked beside humanity since the first nights we laid down to sleep. What is left, then, is not despair but understanding. The hag is not a curse that isolates us. She is a story that connects us. Across oceans and centuries, people have felt the same weight, seen the same shadows, heard the same whispers. They have given her different names, but the experience is the same. In that shared terror, there is also shared humanity. So if you wake one night and find yourself frozen, breath shallow, chest heavy, and shadows shifting at the edge of your vision, remember this: you are not alone. Countless others have faced the same moment, and countless others will again. The hag may come, but so will the morning. And with the morning comes the knowledge that fear, once spoken, loses some of its power. The story of the old hag ends here, but only in words. In life, she will continue, pressing against our chests, whispering in our ears, and demanding to be remembered. And we will remember her, not just as terror in the night, but as proof of the power of folklore, the resilience of human imagination, and the strange, fragile beauty of being alive.